This is my Computer Games Design Studio 2 submission video. This gameplay video is of Super Smash TV, one of the games that I used during my research. For this module I decided to go for a twin stick shooter as I wanted to create something different to what I did last year. I began to research some twin stick shooter games to get a rough idea of what could be included in the game. Super Smash TV is my #1 inspiration for making my game. So as you can see, when the player kills the enemy, they gain a score from each kill. The player can collect power-ups to increase the player's damage. Once the enemies have been killed off, they can then proceed in going in 4 of the directions to go to a different map. Super Smash TV was always one of my favourite games. I liked the style of the game, so I felt like I wanted to make something using a similar idea. I then began to develop my ideas further and made a list of what things I aim to add to my game. The reason for making this list is so when it comes to scripting, I will know what I want to add and what to look for. Here are some of my assets I have modelled and textured. I began the construction of the level. I tried to create realistic sci-fi looking textures but low poly models, as I plan to reuse a lot of them around the level. Assets such as the floor section here is a modular piece, so when it comes to creating the level, the pieces will fit nicely together. So for the general look of the map, I wanted the level to be dark with a sci-fi futuristic plasma based look that the player will enjoy. I aim to use various lighting and emissive maps to bring the colours out in certain objects. Now I'm going to play test the game that I've created so far, then I'll break it down. The game isn't fully finished yet, as there is still a lot more things that I plan to implement. So before I begin, I'm just going to start by saying the level was made from scratch and didn't use the Unreal starter template. The splash screen menu you first see was easy enough to make using Photoshop. I was then able to implement it into the engine using the UMG engine blueprint. I then scripted it so on the menu I have 3 options that the user can interact with, where they play, change resolution or quit game. The play was done by on-click to open level and remove the HUD. For the options, I wanted to hide the main menu and show the options section, which was done by changing the visibility. And finally, the resolution change was done by executing console command r.setRes and the desired resolution, which sets the resolution of the game. I feel this adds more of a professional feel to the game rather than jumping straight into the game level. Creating the movement and rotation was fairly easy to do, as it was a case of input axis, then add movement along the correct axis. Once I added the movement, I could finally move my character around the screen. This is a major part of my game, as the character needs to be able to move around in order to stay alive. As I am using the mannequin for both the character and the enemy character, I wanted to alter the character of the enemy so the user knows who their main character is. In order to do this, I had to create a dynamic material instance that sets the enemy to a certain colour. The second thing I need to try and do was create an enemy AI that keeps moving towards the player until they get to a certain radius where they can hit the player. I managed to do this by using the node AI move to. I did have an issue where the enemy would stop once they got to that acceptance radius, but this was solved by adding a set timer every 1 second looping, so it always calls the track player. Finally, I had to remember to add a navigation mesh to my level in order for the enemy to follow after the player. So I wanted to add weapon firing behaviour, as I wanted my character to shoot, as that is the main purpose of my game I'm trying to make. So in order for the weapon to shoot the projectile, I had to make a projectile using a collision sphere, a static mesh and an Unreal projectile movement. I then had to set up the spawn point on my weapon mesh. I spawned the projectile in the scene by doing a custom event and linking it to spawn actor. Then linking it to work transform, which is targeted at the spawn point. I then also needed to have a pull trigger which controls the amount of times the projectile can be fired. This was achieved by doing a custom event, linking it to a do once, which fires the projectile, then goes to a set timer. This then links to the fire event, telling it to shoot the projectile a certain amount of times per that second. Finally, the release trigger, I needed to clear the timer to stop the automatic firing. This is then cast to do once, so the gun is ready to fire once again. I had a small issue here as there was no blueprint for clear time, but using clear time with handle seemed to work. So now I had the weapon firing behaviour coded in. My next job was to add a weapon to the character's hands using a blueprint that spawns the weapon. This was done by attaching a socket to the player character, then I will have it spawn the weapon to the hero target and attached to that socket so it's placed in the hands of the character. The final part was to code it in so you can fire the gun. So when the button is pressed, we want it to branch to true, which will fire the gun. If it's false, by not pressing the button, then it stops the gun from being shot. After testing the gun, I noticed a little bit of jittering when I fired the gun. I managed to fix this by simply going out onto the projectile and hitting no collision. So now I've got the firing behaviour coded in. It was a case of having it so the projectile does damage when it collides with the enemy, but obviously I need to make sure when it hits the player, it doesn't do any damage to the player himself. Here I needed to add a tag onto the player character so if he touches the projectile it doesn't hurt him. By adding a tag, it asks to see if the object has the friendly tag or not. If it doesn't have the friendly tag, then the pawn will take damage. After the character's health has fully dropped, it destroys the enemy. I also realised that when the character shot so many projectiles off, they kept in the wall space, which is taxing on the PC. So to keep it less taxing, I wanted to change the initial lifespan of the projectiles to 1.5 seconds, which is altered in the class defaults. Now I had dealing damage, I needed to implement the damage. I came across two bugs once I had added this to the game. The first being, when the player died, the player could still move the character. This was easily solved by disabling the input. The second issue was the fact that when I respawned the hero, the weapon was still left behind. Again, this was easily solved by adding a destroy actor node and linking the target to the variable weapon and self. I have also added it so when the player dies, it takes me to the main menu screen. In the effect health section of the enemy character, here I can control how much damage an enemy can deal to the player. This will be handy as I want to have stronger enemies in my level further on in development. Finally, I need it so when the enemy touches the actor, it will hurt the player and affect their health. This is done by on event begin overlap, cast a hero character, then by linking it to a timer using the function name damage the hero. I can then link it so every 1 second, if the enemy character is touching the player, it will deal 20 health point damage by 1 second. The reason I have picked 20 health points is because I don't want the character to die on first hit. This essentially gives the player 5 lives. I plan to add health pickups in the future so the user can heal their character. Overall, I am quite happy with what I have managed to achieve on the technical side of things. I still have a lot more ideas that I want to try and implement to improve the gameplay elements of the game. So the main thing I want to try and add are pickups of special powers. For example, health pickups or damage modifiers. Doing this will add more elements to the game and make it more unique and enjoyable. I also want to try and add a pause section in the game in case the user wanted to pause mid-game. Finally, another aim is to get more spawns in and different coloured enemies that deal more damage, or if possible, new characters entirely. I might also look into other surprising elements that might improve the game, for example, moving platform or traps in a level. This will improve the gameplay drastically. Finally, on to the design side of things. There is a lot I want to progress on. It's going to be crucial that I get feedback from others and research other top-down shooters on how to make the game level look more professional. So far, I'm rather happy with the look of the map, but the main thing I want to try and do is add more models and texture to clutter up the scene more. Another thing I want to look into would be implementing particle effects and improving on the lighting to make the effects look better. Lastly, I want to try and add more sound effects and music to the game as it will improve the game, giving it a more polished finish to the game.